He entered the office every day with his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Everyone stood when he passed. Heads bowed. Silence followed him like a shadow. Mr. Karim was one of the richest businessmen in the city, owner of a chain of multinational companies, and a man who measured people not by their hearts, but by their degrees and by the shine of their shoes. The cleaning woman, Razia, was always already there when he arrived, mopping floors before sunrise, her scarf tied tightly around her worn hair, hands cracked from years of scrubbing tiles no one noticed. He never looked at her. Until that morning. That morning, everything changed. He entered the office in his usual stride, but paused when he saw Razia reading a crumpled piece of paper under the flickering hallway light. Her eyes squinted, lips moving as if whispering each word to herself. She didn't notice him standing there, watching. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply, the amusement already rising in his voice. Razia quickly stood, hiding the paper. "Sir, nothing. Just cleaning." But Karim stepped closer. He had a habit, a cruel one, of making jokes at others' expense, especially those he thought were beneath him. He pulled a folded note from his coat pocket, a letter from one of his European clients, written in a rare dialect of French. He had received it just yesterday but hadn't yet sent it to his translation team. Holding it up, he smirked. "If you can translate this," he said with a mocking laugh, "I'll pay you everything I own." The nearby employees chuckled nervously. No one dared speak when Karim was in one of his moods. Razia looked at him. For the first time, she didn't lower her gaze. Her voice was quiet. "Do you mean it?" Karim scoffed. "I do. But you won't. So there's nothing to worry about." Razia held out her hand. "Let me try." People froze. Was she serious? Did she even know what she was doing? He handed her the note with a smirk. "Be my guest." She unfolded it gently, like it was something sacred. Her eyes scanned the page. The room fell silent. And then she began to speak. Fluent. Smooth. Not just translating word for word, but explaining meaning, context, tone. She even corrected a minor grammatical error in the original. Karim's smile faded. By the time she finished, his face was pale. "How do you know this language?" he asked, his voice lower now. Curious. Unsteady. Razia handed the note back. Her hands no longer trembled. "I was a professor in Syria," she said softly. "I taught linguistics and comparative literature. My husband and son were killed in a bombing. The university was destroyed. I fled, and ended up here." Silence. "I never planned to be a cleaning woman. But life, it doesn't always ask what we planned, sir." Karim stared at her, speechless. Around them, the staff avoided eye contact, unsure how to react to the unraveling of their boss's ego. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he asked. Razia's eyes were steady now. "Would you have listened?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and then, slowly, the arrogance on his face gave way to something unfamiliar: shame. From that day, Karim was no longer the same. He offered her a position not just in his office, but as head of a new multilingual department. He connected her with scholars, funded refugee education programs, and made it his mission to find and uplift others like her, silent warriors with forgotten brilliance. But Razia didn't want his money. Not all of it, anyway. She asked for only one thing: use your wealth to build a school. A place where no one is judged by their clothes, their shoes, or where they clean, but by the stories they carry in their hearts. And he did. The Razia Foundation now stands in 3 countries, offering free education to displaced women from war-torn nations. Her story is taught in those classrooms not to glorify her struggle, but to remind the world. Wisdom can wear worn shoes. Intelligence can carry a mop. And sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones no one notices. But her story didn't end there. Razia didn't seek fame. When the story leaked to a local news channel, cleaning woman stuns billionaire with fluent French translation, she almost asked them to take it down. But something in her heart said, let them see. Let other silent souls know they're not alone. What started as a whisper became a wave. Within weeks, journalists from all over were calling. NGOs reached out, schools asked her to speak. Women wrote letters from Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, and even remote villages in Pakistan. They said, "I thought I was forgotten, too." And Razia always replied personally, in quiet handwriting, in the language each woman understood. Mr. Karim kept his word. Not just by building one school but by donating the land for a center that became more than a school. It became a sanctuary. The Razia Foundation was built from glass and stone, but its walls carried stories of survival, of mothers who once taught physics under candlelight, of daughters who memorized poetry while fleeing war. Inside, women of all ages sat cross-legged on rugs, learning again, laughing again. Some with babies on their laps. Some with old wounds and new hope. And Razia, she didn't take a high title. No office. No corner desk. She sat among them. She taught language. But more than that, she taught belief. That knowledge doesn't disappear when bombs fall. That a mind is never poor even when pockets are empty. That dignity cannot be erased by scrubbing floors. One afternoon, as she was preparing for a small seminar, a girl knocked on the door. "Are you Razia, ma'am?" she asked shyly. Razia nodded. The girl looked around. Nervous. Eyes glossy with held-back tears. "I think you knew my mother." She handed Razia an old photograph worn at the edges, colors fading. It showed a young woman in a university scarf with Razia smiling beside her. Razia gasped. Her hands trembled. "This is Fatima." The girl nodded. "She was my mother. She died during our escape. But she always told me if you ever find Razia auntie, tell her you still have her books and that I learned to read because of her." For the first time in a long time, Razia wept. Not out of grief, but because a piece of her past had survived in a child. In a life. She pulled the girl into a hug, holding on as if healing every broken year in that one moment. From that day on, that girl Lena became her shadow, her student, her voice for the next generation. And as Lena stood at the podium years later, addressing an international conference on women's education, she opened with the words, "My mother gave me the gift of literacy. But Razia auntie gave me the courage to speak." In the front row, Karim sat with gray in his beard and quiet pride in his eyes. Behind him were ambassadors, CEOs, scholars all standing in ovation. But Razia, she was off to the side, sitting beside a janitor's daughter, helping her with English grammar. Because Razia had never wanted a spotlight. She only wanted the world to finally hear the voices it had long ignored. And her voice, soft, powerful, unforgettable, had changed the course of hundreds of lives. But this wasn't her ending. Because somewhere in a borderless camp, under a cracked roof, another woman still held onto books she once taught from waiting, hoping, surviving. And Razia knew. Her journey was just beginning. It was an ordinary winter evening at the foundation. Razia was sitting under the courtyard's old neem tree, correcting a young girl's essay. A light breeze blew through the leaves, rustling pages and memories alike. Lena ran up to her, holding a yellowed envelope. "Ma'am, this came by post. It's odd. No sender name. Just your name, written in Urdu." Razia's brows furrowed. She hadn't received a personal letter in years. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single torn page, from an old children's storybook, Parrot Story, and on the back, just 3 words written in trembling handwriting. "Ami, im live. Mom, I'm alive." Her heart stopped. No name. No signature. But something about those words, that shaky penmanship. It couldn't be. Her son, Amir. Her precious boy. He had just turned 7 the last time she held him. That night, bombs. Fire. Smoke. Screams. She thought he and her husband were gone. Forever. She had searched every list. Every hospital. Every camp. Nothing. She kept the page against her chest for minutes, breath ragged, heart pounding. Could it really be him? Lena watched in silence. Is everything okay? Razia finally spoke, voice shaking, eyes distant. I think my son is alive. News spread across the foundation quickly, but Razia stayed quiet. She didn't want hope to become another heartbreak. The only clue was a strange stamp on the envelope, an old emblem used in a closed refugee camp across the border, one that had recently opened for humanitarian outreach. Kareem made the arrangements without asking. A private team. Security. Full access. But Razia didn't care about protocols. She only wanted one thing, to know the truth. She traveled with Lena and Kareem's assistant, crossing mountains and dusty roads. At the gate of the old camp, an officer looked at the page and nodded. There's a young man who leaves these notes, always unsigned. We thought he was mentally unstable. But he speaks multiple languages, fluent French, Arabic, Urdu. Comes to the library daily. Sits alone. Writes messages. Razia's hands shook. Can I see him? The officer nodded. He'll be here soon. He always comes at sunset. The sky turned orange. And then a figure appeared. A young man, tall, slender, face half-shadowed under the dusty sky. His eyes scanned the area as if always searching. When he saw her, he stopped. Frozen. Razia stepped forward. Her voice barely a whisper. Amir? The boy's lips trembled. His eyes welled up. He took a step forward. Ami. She ran to him. They embraced, both sobbing not for lost time, but for found eternity. The world around them melted. Every pain, every wound, every unanswered prayer came pouring out. Later, she learned the full story. He had survived. His father hadn't. He was taken across the border by fleeing villagers. Raised by a crippled librarian who noticed his gift for language. Amir grew up hungry for words, for stories, but always missing a face, a voice. Until one day, he saw a news clip on a broken radio. A cleaning woman stuns billionaire with fluent French. He knew instantly. That's my mother, he had whispered to himself. But he didn't know how to find her until he wrote that note. Razia brought him back. Not just to the foundation but to life. Amir became the soul of the school, teaching, writing, creating books for children displaced by war. His bond with Lena, who had once thought she was alone, became that of sibling survivors stitched together by hope. And Kareem? He quietly funded the construction of a mere library for lost voices, a space where any child, no matter how broken or forgotten, could write their first story. Razia never returned to mopping floors. But she never forgot them either. Because floors carry footprints. And every footprint has a story. And sometimes, a single sentence translated by the right voice can bring a mother back to her son, and a world back to its senses. But her journey, still not over. Because in the back row of her next seminar, someone sits watching silently. A man in shadows. A scar above his left eye. Holding a journal with the initials RK on it. He too is holding a story. But that's for another day. The hall was silent. Rows of children sat in their clean uniforms, faces glowing with hope. Parents, teachers, diplomats, and strangers filled the back rows. The grand opening of the Amir Library for Lost Voices was more than just a ceremony, it was a miracle born from ashes. On the stage, a tall young man adjusted the microphone. Amir. No longer the boy who wrote anonymous letters. He now stood firm, his mother seated proudly in the front row. Lena sat beside her, clutching a speech of her own. Amir looked out into the sea of faces and began. I once believed I was forgotten. Lost in a war I never started. Raised by silence. Raised by strangers. But even in that darkness, I remembered one thing, my mother's voice as she read stories to me at night. That voice became my compass. He paused, his eyes finding Razia's. She found me. Not with money. Not with power. But with belief. She reminded the world that dignity has no uniform, that knowledge cannot be erased by war, and that even a cleaning woman can clean the dust off someone's future. A few audience members wiped tears. "I stand here not as a survivor," he continued, "but as a son, as a student, as a teacher of those whose voices were silenced. This library is not just bricks and books. It is proof that the world can break but we can rebuild." Thunderous applause filled the hall. Razia remained still, her hand covering her mouth, overwhelmed. Not with pride but with peace. As Amir stepped down, Razia was invited to the stage one last time. She didn't prepare a speech. She just looked at the children and whispered, "If someone ever tells you your life has no value because of what you wear, where you sleep, or what you've lost, look them in the eye and say, 'I am a story still being written.'" Silence. Then standing ovation. And behind the curtain, unseen by many, Mr. Kareem stood with hands folded, eyes moist, heart forever changed. The man who once mocked a cleaning woman for touching a foreign language, now funded hundreds of lives across borders. And as the sun set over the glass roof of the library, Razia stood alone for a moment at the steps, watching the horizon. In her hand a photo of Amir as a child. In her heart nothing missing. Her journey was never meant for applause. It was meant for impact. Because the floor she once cleaned now carried the footprints of future leaders. And the world would never ignore voices like hers again.